think I will just cover a little bit of the background, but I'll keep letting people in as we go, if that's okay. So I'm sure Natalie will explain, but she's got a presentation and some points to run through with us, which tend to take about half an hour or so, and then we've got time for some questions afterwards. So do if questions pop in your head as you go, please do feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat. But Natalie is very thorough, so you may find your questions get answered as she goes. So when we come to the Q&A, if you'd like to ask your question in person, please do just raise your hand, and Natalie or I will be able to unmute you then. We have had a few technical difficulties our end, so apologies, the recordings from the past sessions haven't come out to people. We will be trying to record again today, so if that changes your decision about camera on, camera off, or how you engage with the session, do keep that in mind. This is the last session in this series of webinars with Natalie. If you would like to be kept in the loop about the potential of future sessions, please do make sure you are on the Shelter Cymru or CHC mailing list, and if you're not, feel free to just send me a message or an email. You've had the joining instructions from me. Lovely. The joining has slowed down. Sure, I've missed a million things there, but if it's all right, I will pass over to Natalie. Natalie's joining us from the Talking About Homes project, which is a Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Nationwide Foundation project. You may have come to the earlier sessions in this series that were introducing framing and talking about homes, or focus specifically on social homes, and today we'll be looking at private rented homes. Over to you, Natalie.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see everybody. As Lauren said, my name is Natalie, for those of you who haven't seen me before, and I work with Nationwide Foundation and Joseph Rowntree Foundation, leading the How to Talk About Homes project. It would be really helpful, just so I can get a sense of the room, and I asked this last week as well, if you've been to either last week's session or on social homes, or the session 2 weeks ago on the introduction to talking about homes, if you can give me a thumbs up or a smile or an emoji, just so I can get a kind of a sense of the room, that's really helpful for me. I'm just kind of looking along. Looks about probably about half to two-thirds of you. So that's really useful. Thank you very, very much, and welcome back. It's always nice to have both newbies and joiners. So I will start with just giving you a quick introduction. But like I say, my name is Natalie. Today we're going to take some of the framing principles that we've looked at in some of the previous sessions, and we're going to take a deeper dive into how we can use them and apply them when we're specifically talking about private renting. So this session is all about the way we communicate and press for changes to private renting. So it's about how you can frame your communications so they work the way you want them to. And it's about building support among the public for your asks. Lauren's run through the housekeeping. As before, I won't be sharing these slides, but there will be links to the resources, and they will be exactly what you need if you want to refer back to anything I've talked about today. I am going, for those of you who've been here before, I'm going to give a sort of 5-minute kind of background, but I will be weaving in bits about private renting, and then we're going to get into the meat of the session. So this project, Talking About Homes, is about changing the narrative on homes so that communicators tell a better story, and in turn the public get behind the systemic solutions that we want to press for. And if we are going to change the system, we need the public and we need policymakers to think about and talk about the system in a different way, in a way that puts the ideas about the importance of affordability and decency at the heart of the public conversation. And this is one of the components that is necessary for systems change. And so to this end, we've been working with and partnering with an organisation called Frameworks UK. So Frameworks UK have carried out the research for this project, and they have revealed the framing principles that we're drawing on today. So absolutely, it's credit to them for this research. The work that we asked Frameworks to do and that they delivered for us was twofold. Firstly, it was how people think about and understand housing. And then secondly, it was about testing communication strategies or ways of framing to shift people's thinking in more productive ways. So I am going to share my screen with you now. Let's go back to that. And hopefully this is going to work nicely and neatly, and that you are seeing my screen now. So I am going to, this is the agenda of what we're going to be covering today. The first two bits are quite quick. What is framing? And then we're going to be revisiting, for those who've been before, the mindsets, but we're going to be looking at them very much through the lens of how the public think about private renting. And then the meat of the session is how we talk about private renting. So as a quick reminder for those who haven't seen it before and for those who are new, I've mentioned the word framing. What do we mean about framing? What is that about? It is about the choices we make, about what ideas we share and how we share them. And that includes what we emphasize, how we explain an issue, and that's going to be quite a big part of today, actually, how we explain an issue, and what we leave unsaid. And it is important to frame really well, because these things can, the way we frame can change the way that people act and think and feel about an issue. And it's important because much of what is around us is already framed by very dominant mindsets, some of which are quite unhelpful, in some cases very unhelpful, and we need to reframe the conversation. So to do that, we are going to use frames that have been tested and backed by evidence. And that gives us much greater confidence that what we're saying is landing in a way we want it to. And what we want to do ultimately is for our conversations, the way we write, the way we talk, to shift hearts and minds towards the changes we want to see supported. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that everything is framed and that we all bring our mindsets to an issue. Things land differently depending on our mindsets, on how we think about an issue. So how we might already be thinking affects what we hear and what we understand. This little cartoon here, whether you see this as a 6 or a 9, might well depend on what you're thinking about at the time, or on your perspective, or on the mindsets and the things that the way your brain thinks. And we need to be skilled at framing, because too often messaging looks like this. There's lots of noise, there's lots of conversations, there's lots of organisations sharing different things, and we want to help draw a consistent understanding. Not everybody's saying the same thing in the same way, but a way we can frame and apply core principles. Because even people who are pretty interested in a topic, but don't work in it and don't get exposed to it every day, they are not going to be hearing messages from advocates like you on a daily basis. So when you are in earshot, you want to make sure you get your framing right. And it's much more powerful if we all use the same framing principles. So then we're going to have much more likelihood of increasing and building traction with our audiences and having a deeper level of understanding. We don't all have to have the same key messages. We don't all even have to have the same audiences, but we should be sticking to some framing principles. And this plays into the opportunities we have to help people think about an issue in a much more helpful way. So if you've been to session before, you'll have seen this slide that I'm going to show now, but I'm going to talk about it particularly through the lens of private renting and what people think about when they hear, when they apply it to private renting. So we need to understand how people think about housing. Framing isn't attitudinal. It's not about what they think. It's not about whether somebody thinks some housing should be built in a field at the end of their road. That's a what people think. That's attitudinal. This is about how people think about homes more widely. They might use that how to apply to what their attitudes then become. But this is about how people think. Okay, and our mindsets, we've all got them all of the time, and we use them all of the time to understand the world. We rely on them for our mindsets. They're important, they help us to make quick decisions, and there are commonly held mindsets, and that's what this piece of research looked for. It looked for the mindsets that were commonly held, that were perpetuated across the population, regardless of kind of different demographic segmentation. So these are widely held mindsets. So there is a very dominant thinking that we all want to own a home. It is absolutely seen as the ideal, and it's a long-standing, deeply held mindset about home ownership. Policies such as right to buy have also driven thinking in this direction. And our conversations nationally, across the UK, in fact, are often primed with thinking about getting on the housing ladder. Owning a home is often seen as a measure of wealth, a measure of success. And because it is a dominant narrative that's talked about so much and thought about so much, it gives limited space and limited opening for us to have constructive conversations about renting. And actually, when people do think about renting, they think it should be temporary, never long-term. So crucially, people can neglect to think about quality when they hold this mindset. So people are thinking that even if a home isn't ideal, it'll do for now, it'll be okay, people aren't going to be there for long. People are thinking the main thing is just having a roof over your head. We know that people recognise that poor quality housing has a negative impact on our lives, but they don't think that better quality homes positively affect us or impact us in a good way. People don't see those benefits. They see that as a neutral state. And inequalities. Now, we do know that people recognise there is inequality in housing. They recognise that it is worse than it was 3 or 4 decades ago. People are talking in the research about the shortage of affordable and quality housing today compared to the 1980s and 1990s. And they also talk about how there's unequal access to housing, especially for people on lower incomes. There's a lot of worry about the increasingly expensive cost of rent, especially in cities, worrying that people can't afford to save a deposit to buy a home. And often people connect that with the inability to save due to the fact that there are very high rental prices. People also recognise when they're looking at the inequalities that they believe many people are stuck in a renting cycle. So they can't purchase a home to get on the property ladder despite their desire to do so, because renting costs a lot and they can't get out of that cycle. But while people do see the inequality exists, they tend to default to dominant ways of thinking about why inequality exists. And namely, that inequality is natural, that it is just part of society. It is the way it is. Housing doesn't work the way they'd like it to, but there's nothing they could do about that. The mindset of individualism is the one I'm going to speak about most in detail of how people think, particularly regarding private renting. Overall, people reason that tenants are ultimately responsible for their own housing situations, and that this could be improved with more willpower or even better judgment. And let me explain what we mean by this. So the mindset of individualism is that people often think that people's housing situations mainly depend on the decisions they make and the way they behave, which are in turn assumed to be shaped by innate strengths and qualities. And to be clear, this isn't a mindset that's unique to homes and housing. Individualism exists in many, many social issues and how people try and understand them. So people are thinking that a person has the willpower to work really hard and make good choices, that they would be able to purchase and maintain a better, higher quality home. And the flip side of that is people can often assume that a lack of work ethic or even laziness is what might cause people to live in poor quality housing, which they often talked about in the research as being rented. Now, unfortunately, there is not much thinking here at all about the system or about regulations or about policies. It is very much focused on local level problems. So thinking that some landlords just naturally care about the quality of the properties they rent out and about the well-being of their tenants, and others simply don't. Worryingly, people were asked to talk about ways renting could be improved, and people feel that responsibility to solve problems tends to fall back on individual renters who live in a place. So again, people aren't thinking about policies or systems or regulations as a solution, as protections as a solution. Instead, people are thinking that an individual tenant is ultimately responsible for choosing the right landlord, And it's up to a tenant to be careful not to rent from landlords who might be engaging in unlawful or unethical practices. So all of this kind of way of thinking around individualism and housing, and particularly private renting, leads people to see private renting as a system that is composed not as a system, in fact, but just of individual housing situations and circumstances, rather than actually being a wider system or wider structure. And because of that, it makes it really hard for people to see the need for broader, widespread structural reforms. The last mindset, very quickly, again, this is an important one, even though it's quick and short. Fatalism, that is recognizing that there are problems, but feeling that it is just all too big and difficult to ever solve. And when people feel this way, they step back from engaging with an issue. They disconnect. So what are we going to do about it to improve, to talk about private renting? We've got to move people away from thinking about private renting as temporary and transient, where a roof over our heads is enough. And we can do that by invoking what our homes mean to us. And firstly, language of homes. So it helps people to see a home as much more than a building. If we talk about homes, much more than a building or a property. It's much more likely that people see a home as essential to decent life if we call it a home. So words like housing or property are less emotive. Things like rental property are very unemotive, very almost the language of business. So they are more likely to trigger people's thoughts of assets. And we don't want to go down that path because that obscures people's understanding and it makes it much harder to land the case of why we need solutions. We want a home to be talked about, a home that's homely. A home is a place of growing and relaxing and playing and resting and sleeping. And we should describe our home as the foundation of our lives. So this is a metaphor and it sparks images in people's minds that can help concepts become more tangible and familiar. When we talk about our home as our foundation, it shows the effects that our homes have on our life outcomes, and that opens up people thinking to more positive impacts. And an example here of how this might look when we're talking in the context of renting privately. Whether we own or rent our home, it should give us stability. But too many people are forced to move from their privately rented homes because the rents are increased, and this undermines this firm foundation for our lives. So whilst people can reason with themselves and others, perhaps, that as long as people have a roof over their head, that it's okay to put up with poor quality or insecurity, this doesn't build support for reform while people hold those mindsets. But talking in the sense of the foundation metaphor does counter that idea. It builds the sense that our home must be a proper foundation. It moves people away from the mindset that renting is temporary and therefore quality and standards don't matter. Instead, we want people to be thinking that homes are foundational and the basis for our lives. And we can talk about having a solid base, we can talk about sturdy and steady. We can reinforce those, we can use those to reinforce that quality matters. And we can flip to show the other side. So what happens if our homes are not foundational, by using words like undermining, like you've got here, or you can talk about weak and unsteady. And another quick example, more explicit, this one is in using the foundation metaphor. Our home's the foundation for our lives. We need to ensure that people living in private rented homes have the same life outcomes and well-being as everyone else. This starts with safe, secure home. Foundation here is the root, the reason a home is important. Now, we know that conversations around renting reform often hang around the idea of rights and renters' rights. So it can be helpful to let you know that Framework's research shows across a number of issue areas that the idea of rights is quite a nebulous concept for people. So if you are talking about rights, which is very common in this dialogue, this conversation space of private renting, the foundation metaphor can really help ground what that means into something tangible. So when you're talking about rights, you need to spell out what those rights are for and what they enable us to do. And using the foundation metaphor in that wider conversation is one of the good ways you can join the dots of what rights give us and what they really mean. And that helps people really kind of get on board with the idea of what the rights are. The next thing we can do when talking about private renting is show why renting matters by connecting our homes with our health. And if you've been to the previous webinars, you'll have heard something like this before. When we're thinking about private renting in particular, we've got to be moving people away from thinking of home in the sense of wealth and property and as an asset. And this frame is a really good way of doing that. So a couple of pointers of how this can be applied to talking about private renting. Link it to mental health. This is particularly salient for people, so we can draw on examples to illustrate that. And that might be the stress of possible eviction, or unexpected rent rises, or worrying about reporting faults. We can illustrate the impact on our mental health of these things. I'd suggest you go further than just saying something like renting is stressful. That probably isn't enough. But with a few extra words, you can make clear why it's renting, why it's stressful, what might be making it stressful. You can bring it alive. Here's an example that takes the health frame on mental health and uses it to make the case for robust enforcement and for making renting more secure. So reforming renting would benefit the health of thousands of people in Wales. When we have the reassurance and confidence that we can stay living in our homes for as long as we want or need to, this lifts the burden of stress that's being carried by far too many of us. And enforcing strong quality standards would mean that every person renting would have the guarantee of a place to call home that enriches their health. Framing our communications and messaging like this helps people see why renting reform needs to be prioritised. So using health is really helpful. Now we want to bridge that gap that we know exists between already recognising the harm caused by poor quality homes, but not realising the benefits of good quality home and the impacts that brings. So we need to use positive and negative examples of the impact on our health. So both of these options on the screen here, they are both good, well-framed examples. They would both get good ticks from me. But they will both be moving mindsets the way you want them to. Now on the negative one, we're talking about the impacts of cold and damp and disrepair, and why better rented standards and enforcement are needed to provide protections. And in the positive example, we're taking the better standards idea and talking about the boost these give to our health and reinforcing the idea that our home is a place where we can thrive. Now, in either of them, actually, you might add another sentence that really paints the picture. So what particularly are the impacts if you wanted to focus on asthma, mobility impairment, depression, better well-being, what you could add more to those. But one thing we know is that across the housing communications world, there are undoubtedly more examples really of the negatives than the positives. So there are more examples of where we hear about where our homes are not meeting our health needs. Now, again, this isn't necessarily problematic, and we know it's a good connection to make. So by using it, we are doing good work. But what we're doing is reminding them of something they already know. So it's definitely a good thing to bring the thinking about this to the front of people's minds, but they do already have this inkling. So we're firing it up, but it's already there. If we want to take people further in their deeper understanding, we also need to extend our communications to sometimes be talking about the positives. So all I would say is think about how and when you can talk about the positive impacts our homes have on our health. Talking about the positives will also ward against fatalism, because what it does is it moves people's thinking about something that they can imagine, a hopeful situation, something you're painting a picture of something that could be achieved, not something that's out of the question and too difficult. So overall, I would say just try to strike a good balance in your way you talk and speak about this, about positive and negative. They both do good work, but don't fall into the trap that's easy to do of automatically defaulting to the negative impacts. So you can flip your message, but it's the framing, the positives that matter. Now, I've taken this example from Bevan of good framing of numbers. Okay, so Bevan has data it wants to share, but long before you get to the percentages and the years and the actual numbers, you've heard the narrative. Okay, so I wanted to just drop this in around a point about data. Data is something we all use a lot, but data doesn't tell the story. And this is a good example from Bevan Foundation here, which the story they want to tell us is in the headline and it's in the first paragraph. This point on data is really that data doesn't tell a whole story, okay? It can support our story, it can be really valuable. There's some figures here that they want to draw attention to. But before we read that, we already know what the story is. We already know that more households in Wales live in the private rented sector than they do in social housing. So when we get to the numbers, we're already primed. It's already been framed. This was a good example I wanted to use to show how data can play a part. Now, explaining to build understanding. Most people don't know about the policies that would improve renting and how they would work. Yet people are much more likely to agree with our point if they understand it. And that's true on any issue. If you don't understand something, you probably aren't going to agree one way or another. So good explanation is absolutely one of the very best things we can do. And when we talked about what framing is, one of the things framing is about is how we explain an issue. So explaining can sometimes get ignored. Sometimes we feel tight on words or time. We might skim over this. We might even think, well, people won't quite understand, so I probably won't get into this. I would really warn you against this. Any comms should have some explanation. So walking through and explaining your case is really important. It shows how we reach a conclusion or a solution, and it helps people make up their minds. And the next slide is going to look a bit busy, but I'll walk you through it. So this is a structure. The key bit you really need to be looking at are the words in bold on the top line of each paragraph. This is a structure for an explanation of the 5 key components of a good explanation. So begin with why it matters. And in this example I've used, we all need a good quality home that supports our health. Then look at the problem that you want to address. So in this example, said many of us in Wales are living in private rented homes which are unsafe, difficult to heat or lack a suitable kitchen or bathroom. Next, the middle piece is the solution. This is really important. In this case, it's about better enforcement, okay? So the landlords can't hide from their responsibility to provide good, safe, quality homes. And then how it would work. Straightforward terms, if our regulation and enforcement systems were redesigned with funding to make this work, it would robustly hold landlords to account. And finally, the impact. And this is bringing us a little bit linking back to the why it matters. Doing this would improve the living conditions of our homes and as a result, improve our well-being and health. The key here is the structure that I've used to build this explanation. So I've used this example here, but you can apply this to other things you want to highlight or call for. It absolutely doesn't have to be this issue particularly. You should be, but whenever you apply your issue across, you should be able to map it to one of these 5 sections. And it will really, really help you make sure you plug those gaps we've talked about before, gaps where people have misunderstanding or no understanding, and they will fill that with their mindsets. So that might be a mindset of individualism or fatalism, or going back to thinking homes as a commodity and a means of investment. We want to move people's mindsets away from those, and this structure is a way of holding that together. And I think it's worth remembering that it is our job to explain systemic issues. So we've got to move thinking away from blaming individuals and instead show that the system needs to be redesigned. So we might not even use the word system or structures in our communications, But that is what this is about. It's not about an individual circumstance of an individual landlord and a renter. It is about the system. And that's going to lead me on to a top tip. This is a quick slide here. In addition to being critical of the system and explaining the solutions, we can counteract fatalism by talking about design and redesign of how policies, systems, regulations can be designed and redesigned. And also it can be applied to practices as well. So this challenges the common notion that the system is natural, that it can't be changed. So language like building and rebuilding, programming and reprogramming, they do the same job because they expose that the system, the way things are, it's created, and also that it doesn't have to stay that way. So it shows that the inference here is that things have happened, or the way that things are now is the result of decisions that people have made or actively chosen not to do. And that has led us to the situation we're in now. And the inference here, with the language of particularly redesign and rebuild, is that different decision making would lead to different outcomes. So the system isn't naturally this way, it's been designed this way, and then feasibly different decisions, different choices could feasibly redesign it into something that works better. A quick point on initialisms and jargon. Many of you working in comms will have kind of come across this before, but I'm going to draw your attention to a couple of points around private renting. When we talk colleague to colleague, we often use these. That's normal workplace speak. But anytime we're speaking to the public, be wary of terms that might mean different things to different people. So one example of that would be housing security. It's a very common expression that's used a lot when we're talking about private renting. To some people, however, that could very reasonably mean poor quality doors and locks, inadequate window frames. So poor housing security can mean poor personal safety. Now, that might be what you mean, but generally we mean about thinking it as a home you can stay in for as long as you want or need to, without fear of eviction. So make sure if you use the term housing security, you then spell out what that actually means. And affordability, that's another term. Now, there's nothing wrong with either of these words. There's nothing wrong with affordability or security, but be wary that many people will think of affordability as a matter of personal preference or spending habits. So what people are willing to pay for something. Yet you'll probably be talking about it as what people are able to pay. So that affordability, in your case, is defined as a particular circumstance, not anything to do with a choice. So we can use these words. There is absolutely nothing wrong with them at all, but make sure you include explanations, because otherwise people are going to fall down gaps, fall into traps, and that's not their fault. So make sure you're talking about what you mean as part of the issue. Another thing just to be careful of is avoid initialisms. We see a lot around about the PRS. It can be quite off-putting and it can exclude some people. I'm pretty sure that there will be many people who live in privately rented homes who've never heard the term PRS. So I like, where possible, to talk about privately rented homes or people living in privately rented homes or private renters. Whenever we use any language or phrase that people don't fully understand, it will do one of two things. Either it will paint the wrong picture in their minds because of the mindsets they hold, or it will make people feel that what you're talking about is very niche or very complicated and that it's nothing to do with them. And in that situation, they disassociate, and that really won't be building support. Because if they don't see that an issue matters or that they don't know what it means, people will not want to engage in supporting your cause. As well as explaining in our communications, we also need to be constantly coming back to how we can fix things. So it shows that we don't have to accept things the way they are. And this is linked to the design and redesign. So we want to show we have confidence and belief that things can change. And things can change builds our faith that solutions are worthwhile. There are deliberate ways we could improve private renting. And again, this diminishes fatalistic thinking that it's not worth bothering. So all I would say on this is talk about concrete solutions early, make them prominent, balance urgency, so with can do, so that you show that change is possible. We can talk about the crisis, but don't leave people stranded in them. Throw people plenty of rope in the form of solutions to see there is a way out. And for every one part that you talk about the problem or the urgency or the severity, use twice as much airtime on the way it can be fixed. And name who is responsible for fixing things. This can help overcome the idea that it's just up to individuals to work harder or make the right choices. When we talk about who has the power to change things, we do tell a more complete story to show that change is possible if people act who are in power. So you could point to leaders of particular parties or the Welsh Government or whoever you think it is that can act to make change happen. So make it clear that a solution lies with them. And how this might look is something like this. We need the Welsh Government to introduce measures to ease the pressure on renters who are being squeezed by the rising cost of living. We know there is a better way. We've seen the government acting on energy costs and they protected renters during the pandemic. But for those of us in privately rented homes have been left to struggle. Increasingly, our rents cost us more than we are able to pay. Private renters have seen an average increase of £61 in the last year. We need the government to act again now and do the right thing to make renting truly affordable. And the thread running through this is a little bit is again the redesign. Things have been different, they could be different again. So it's not an inevitable situation. So my final main point today is about how people can use their own experiences of renting to help bring to life the situations that they face. And this can be really helpful when people who don't know about this firsthand hear about it, because it helps to bring to life why we need reform to renting. So when we're telling stories from lived experience, we can ask and answer questions that draw out scale and context so that stories and inequalities can't be explained away and written off. What we really, really want to ward away from is people thinking that somebody's story is a one-off or it's exceptional. Because if you're telling your story or talking to somebody who is, my advice would be to weave in some of this information. And I've written these as questions. So does it affect a lot of people? Are there lots of people in your neighbourhood who are affected? Are there others in the same situation as you? What support have you had? What support do you think you should have had? What could have prevented this? This really wards off individualism, okay? So people can't dismiss stories. It helps people who are telling their story without getting into the complexities of it, but show naturally how the role of the system has played in the way that things have happened. And just a recap then of the key points today. If you want to talk about private renting and you want to frame it well, then I would invoke what our homes really mean, because that helps people understand why they are the foundation of our lives. Connect our homes with our health. I will always say this, we want the story to be about health, not wealth. We want the story to be about why our homes make us healthy, not why our homes make us wealthy. Explain to build understanding. And that's especially if you're talking about policy, why would we need it? How would it work? What problem is it going to affect? And how can we fix it? Helping people to see that there is a solution helps to ward against fatalism. And then the last part, using real stories connects people with experiences, particularly helps people see when problems with systems are not one-off experiences. I would urge you, if this takes your interest and you think you would like to take it further, then have a look at our guides, especially the green private renting resource. These are intended to be very easy to use. If you want a paper version, drop me a line. I'll put my address shortly in the chat, but they are really practical guides. The blue one is our framing toolkit. That's kind of the key part, the core of our work. and then we've done the guide into private renting. I'm going to stop in a moment and stop sharing my slides, and then I will ask if there are any questions. So let's stop that, and I'll pop my email address in the chat first of all. So if anybody wants to get in touch or ask for a guide, then they're very, very welcome. Let's do that now.
Thank you, Natalie. That was really helpful. Again, I'm sure there's lots of us here that are currently responding to Welsh Gov's white paper on adequate housing and fair rent. And I think we can sometimes get caught up in looking at the practices of individual landlords, but there's a much bigger system that isn't protecting people here. And I think, yeah, a lot of us are drawing on that in our white paper responses. So yes, a really timely reminder and lots of helpful guidance as always. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Natalie they'd like to pop in the chat, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute you? We will send out either the end of this week or the start of next week links to those documents that Natalie has been talking about, the guidance from the project on talking about homes, to everyone who signed up to any of these webinars. So you'll have all of those and some other helpful bits coming your way. Just giving it a last second in case there's any questions. Lots of cameras off, so I imagine you're all like me and trying to scoff your lunch before a 2 o'clock meeting. Okay. Thank you, Natalie. All of these sessions have been really helpful, and it's been nice to have that like cohesive thread running between the three. So yeah, really, really appreciate it. Thank you for giving your time for those of us in Wales. And thank you to CHC as well, who have kind of helped behind the scenes with all of these and spreading the word. So it's been lovely to have such a mix of attendees. I just wanted to quickly flag that Natalie will be coming to Wales in person for a couple of sessions in the coming months. Those of you who are who work for social landlords, if you are kind of comms policy people, you should be getting some information from CHC in the coming weeks or so about a session specifically for social landlords and talking about homes. More broadly than that, then, if your organisation is a Homes for All Cymru member, which is any third sector organisation working in housing and homelessness, if you're not and you would like to be, pop me an email, because Shelter Cymru are the secretariat for that group. But we'll also be having a session with Natalie at the end of March, which will be looking kind of ahead a little bit to our Senedd 2026 messaging as a sector and how we can use some of the wonderful research and learning from JRF and the Nationwide Foundation to kind of have some cohesive messages between us all. Okay. Anything else from you, Natalie?
No, just to say it's been absolutely lovely and privileged to be here for the last 3 sessions, and I hope if you get, I think Lauren is going to be sending out asking for any feedback, and if you've got 30 seconds to fill that in, I'd be ever so grateful. It's just useful to kind of get that back, but it's been, if you do want to get the paper resources, absolutely get in touch with me. Don't hold back, don't be shy. I've got them here in a box over in the corner there. I can pop them in an envelope without any bother to you at all. So I would say is lots of people I talk to who have the paper resources say, I'm so glad I got the paper resources, because I can dip in and out of them so much more easily than trying to find a PDF on my computer. So if you want one, absolutely get in touch. Don't hesitate, don't be shy. I've got them here, sat in a box in the cupboard in the corner. Only a light and load of my cupboard. It's been lovely to be here doing this. Thank you very much for listening as well, and being so good to have so many people turn up to these sessions.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Diolch, Natalie. It'll be nice to see you in person in coming months.
Thank you very much.